day and night to address issues of anti-Muslim sentiment in the West in particular. So I do have a panel, and I ask the panelists that we do not have any prepared remarks. So there is no prepared remarks. What we are doing is we're going to engage in a discussion. And I will be asking the panelists questions about what are the best practices for Islamophobia. And then I want to turn on to you also to ask questions. So we don't have 10 minutes presentation, we don't have 5 minutes presentation. What we have is a dialogical discussion here. So with that, I wanted to begin the discussion where we have a very diverse panel here. We have, people from the United States, we have from the United Kingdom, we have from Kosovo, and they will be sharing with you the best practices that they have been doing to address Islamophobia. So from my far right, we have Dr. Jim Zogby. Jim is the president of the Arab Institute in Washington, D.C. And to his left, we have Professor Besa. She is a professor in the university in Kosovo. And to her left, we have Catherine Osborne. Catherine is the director of Shoulder to Shoulder, standing with American Muslims, upholding American values, and she will be telling more about Shoulder to Shoulder. To my immediate left is Rabbi, former Ambassador at Large, David Saperstein from the United States. And to his left, Qari Asim from the UK. All of these leaders have been engaging the communities in addressing issues of Islamophobia. I don't want to basically read their bios. You can do that in the program book. But I want to save the time so that we can have a discussion. So my first question is actually to Catherine Osborne. Catherine, you are the director of Shoulder to Shoulder. It is an organization that is founded in the United States for one purpose, and that is to stand with American Muslims to uphold American values. Tell us briefly about Shoulder to Shoulder. What is Shoulder to Shoulder?
Oh, there, okay. Thank you, sorry. Thank you very much for having me on this panel, and to the forum and to Sheikh bin Baya. Really are grateful for being part of the conversations that are happening here over the past few days. So Shoulder to Shoulder is it's a coalition of 35 different national religious organizations and denominations in the United States that came together back in 2010 in the context of a rising tide of anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States. These Christian and Jewish partners came together to say, what can we do? What can we do more to take a stand against anti-Muslim sentiment? And so these partners came together and formed the organization Shoulder to Shoulder, which continues to do work on both the national and the local levels around the United States to address anti-Muslim bigotry through education, through media, through advocacy, and other efforts. And actually, we have a video to show of the founding of Shoulder to Shoulder to give you a bit more of an idea of the context that Shoulder to Shoulder came about in. So, video.
Show the video, please. So it is a 3 minutes video, or?
I think that's right.
Okay.
The street from the Islamic Center in Temecula.
Supporters outnumbered protesters by a wide margin.
Arlington police have stepped up patrols around city mosques after vandalism and anti-Islam graffiti appeared on the South Arlington Mosque.
This is an insult, this is demeaning, this is humiliating that you would build a shrine to the very ideology that inspired the attacks of 9/11.
When people are talking about Islam being a religion of peace, this is baloney. It just isn't.
Islam is not a religion of peace, but the Quran promotes violence.
America was not built on hatred. America was built on love.
The First Amendment to the Constitution is the best friend that religion has in this nation.
The principles that protect Muslims today here in this country will protect Christians, Jews, and others tomorrow.
We stand by the principle that to attack any religion in the United States is to do violence to the religious freedom of all Americans.
Those of us who care about this country, we have learned that we have to stand up for our Muslim brothers and sisters and say, this is not okay.
Muslims know that the Quran will not disappear with the burning of a book. It wouldn't disappear with the burning of all of the Qurans in the world because millions of Muslims across the world have memorized the Quran.
We had to speak more directly to the anti-Muslim bigotry that is going on across America today.
As religious leaders in this great country, we have come together in our nation's capital to denounce categorically the derision, misinformation, and outright bigotry being directed against America's Muslim community.
Some of the most offensive statements about Islam, unfortunately, have come forth from the Baptist community. And therefore, some of us as Baptist leaders felt that it was important for us to join with ISNA and with our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Part of the problem is that we have not shared these things widely enough. We've taken them for granted and we've assumed that if we do it locally, that's enough. No, now we're realizing that we need to be able to share these with one another, that the word about interfaith relations, tolerance, dialogue will be lifted up as the dominant voice and not simply hidden in ways that we may have done too much of in the past.
We have to make sure that our country is known around the world as a place where liberty of religion, where respect for your neighbor, where love for your neighbor, where these things are the most prominent in our society.
We have signed the Common Word document and engaged in that as a principle of religious freedom, respect and reciprocity between Christians and Muslims. That's why we've engaged with our Jewish colleagues in education of our congregations about each other's faith so that there is not distortion of what Jews are and what they believe and what Judaism is on the part of Muslims.
As an evangelical, I say to those who do this, I say, you bring dishonor to the name of Jesus Christ. You directly disobey his commandment to love our neighbor.
And so it's not just a religious issue, it's not just a media issue, it has become a political issue. It should not have become that kind of issue, and I think we need to speak out against that.
The successful integration of Muslims in America has become a model for the rest of the world, for Europe in particular. European governments are sending their people, their delegations and leaders here to study how these things have been achieved. We are preaching the gospel. It's not exclusive, it's inclusive. It's not about hate, it's about love.
One of the next steps that has been discussed is the possibility of another meeting like this one, but much larger, with people of various faiths across the country coming together to talk about what are the real strategies we need to do together to end this anti-Muslim bigotry.
Our message is a message of working together, working for each other, taking care of the person who needs help, and making sure that we try to live everybody together in a good and holy life. That's what America is, and that's the message that I pray that we will get out to all the people of the world so that they will know who we are and who we're trying to be. So it's a great joy for me and a great privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine. Rabbi Saperstein, you were one of the founders of Shoulder to Shoulder. You attended the first founding press conference of Shoulder to Shoulder. You always say Shoulder to Shoulder today represent about 250 million Americans in the United States. So tell us, Rabbi Saperstein, as one of the major Jewish leaders in the United States, tell us about the experience, your founding member. Tell us the engagement of the Jewish communities with Muslim communities through not only at the leadership level, but at the grassroots. There are efforts that have been made.
It was a great honor to be part of the founding of Shoulder to Shoulder. What it consisted of were the leaders of denominations and faith groups representing that, the members of which comprise about 250 million Americans, all the major faith groups in the United States, their leadership joined together. And we did it because after 9/11, increasingly, there had been rhetoric against the Muslim community. There had been an increase in hate crimes, although still in America we're talking about a matter of hundreds out of 330 million Americans, and every single one of those needs to be responded to. And we decided that we would stand together with the Muslim community. This is a long tradition in America. America is a place where there are stronger ties of interreligious cooperation than probably any country in the world. Every local community has some kind of clergy council of people from different faith groups across America who stand up to confront problems in local communities and work together at a national level to address problems facing America. For the Jewish community, this was something of a significant importance to us. The relation between the Jewish and the Muslim community goes back to the very beginning of Islam. Jews lived in general far better under Muslim rule than it did under Christian rule or in other areas. We in America have had ties with each other, so that ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, and my denomination that I ran the public policy arm for many years, my denomination, which is the largest in the United States, we work together to have pulpit exchanges at local communities, to invite each other into our homes respectively, celebrate holidays together. That's how you get to build bridges of friendship and understanding and to deepen our understanding of each other. So these were important strategies for us to build bridges, and when the opportunity came for national leadership to stand together against any kind of Islamophobia or hate action or speech against the Muslim community, I think every one of those religious leaders that you just saw in the film were proud to stand firmly and publicly on behalf of the Muslim community.
I remember Rabbi Saperstein, one of the reasons you have that, you are localizing the interfaith dialogue, putting together synagogue and the mosque at the local level. And I remember the former president of the URJ, Union for Reform Judaism, Rabbi Eric Yaffe, said when he addressed the ISNA convention, he said we have two options, whether to watch what's going on in the Middle East and to bring him back home, or to build relationship at the local level. And I have chosen the latter. And with that, the book came, Jewish scholars and Muslim scholars get together and produce the book Children of Abraham, working together.
Right, which was an effort of the Jewish and Muslim community to do a little bit of what the extraordinary scholarship gathered in this room are doing, to lift up from our traditions what we have to say about each other and about the other, in the biblical mandate to protect the stranger in our community and give to the stranger all the social protections given to the Jewish citizen of the community. You had this idea of community relations from the very beginning. There's a concept in the Talmud, the authoritative compilation of Jewish law over 600 years, from about the year 100 before the Common Era to 500 in the Common Era. In that book, there's a rule called Mipnei Darchei Shalom that says, for the sake of the ways of peace in our community, with the benefits that Jews and non-Jews living together would collect charity together, distribute charity together, give to the poor of the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, visit the sick together, bury the dead together, Mipnei Darchei Shalom, for the sake of the ways of shalom. And in Hebrew, shalom, lishalem, means not only peace, but to make whole, to heal. In the same way, salam has that overtone. It's not just the Greek pax, the Latin pace, that's the absence of strife, but it is something that is much richer than that. So we have found it very important to lift up teachings about each other, because in America people know so little about Islam, so little about the Muslim community. Your structure is very different from the denominational structure that the Christian community and Jewish community are familiar with. And so it takes a lot of work to do education. That's required all over the world if we're to break down some of the barriers between religious groups and maximize interreligious cooperation.
Yeah, education is always the key word here. I want to get back going back to Dr. Jim Zoghbi. You know, Dr. Jim, also you are a founding member of Shoulder to Shoulder. The Arab American Institute is a founding member and is still in the advisory committee. So can you just tell us about the significance of Shoulder to Shoulder to the Arab American Institute?
Well, the issue of Islamophobia is one that, of course, affects us, and in our own experience was preceded by anti-Arab bigotry, and there's a difference. In large measure, the issues that we faced that caused our exclusion or painful discrimination had a political bent. And while there is a certain political use of Islamophobia, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, there's something deeper here, and I think that it needs to be recognized, a sense that there's almost something inherent about Islam that is fundamentally wrong. At least a third of the Arab community is Muslim, and we had at one point people being targeted because they were perceived to be Arab. Now people are targeted because they are perceived to be Muslim, and so we're joined at the hip in this struggle. But let me say just a bit about the politics here, because this event, this founding event, came on the heels of the 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
And it also grew out of a period when there was an upsurge that is coming after 2010 in the congressional elections and the Victory Mosque.
Right.
And let's be really clear about this. We had a huge spike in anti-Muslim and anti-Arab. I mean, 2 people went to jail right after 9/11 for threatening my life. And there were Sikhs who were killed because they were perceived to be Arab. And there were Muslims who were targeted all over the country. And then there was a diminishment. It dropped. It didn't spike again until, number one, the election of Barack Obama, when, as a way of targeting him, he was made to be foreign and different and maybe a Muslim. And then in 2010, there was the effort to paint the mosque that was being proposed in Manhattan as a victory mosque, Muslims trying to conquer America. Newt Gingrich was a leader of that. 17 congressional campaigns used TV ads about it. The good news is only one of them won. The rest all lost. And it stayed as a political issue in the 2012 presidential campaign. 5 candidates used it. The good news is all 5 lost. In 2016, it was used again, and the bad news is that one of them won. But here's the good news. The reaction to President Trump and his promoting this agenda has actually had a backlash effect. In the poll that we just released, for the first time since we've been polling on Arabs and Muslim American attitudes towards them, the numbers are over 50% favorable, 2-to-1 favorable over unfavorable. People, both Democrats and Republicans, have recoiled against the president's rhetoric, against the Muslim ban, against the targeting of Muslims. And so the problem, I think, does have a non-political component, and I think that the dialogue sessions and meeting and shoulder to shoulder are important, but there's also a political component. The good news is, as I said, I think that we're winning the political battle here. Certainly we've got a problem in the rhetoric that still is coming from some, but more and more Americans are rejecting it, and I think that that's where I'm finding hope.
Yeah, so this engagement, shoulder to shoulder, and other political elements that you mentioned, now today the anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States is decreasing. The anti-Muslim sentiment
is decreasing.
It's decreasing.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And on several levels. For example, overall attitudes are decreasing, but also when we ask the question, if a Muslim American held a high government post, are you confident that person could do the job, or do you think their religion would impact them? A greater number of people today say, I'm confident that person could do the job, than 3 or 4 years ago when we polled on this number. And I really believe that well, we don't have direct questions on this, but I really believe that it is partly a reaction to an embarrassment. And look, David will tell you, I mean, in the Jewish community, they've dealt with this issue. We've dealt with it in the Arab community, and we used to say among ourselves, at the end of the day, I don't care if people like me or dislike me, but I want them to be embarrassed to publicly dislike me. Anti-Semitism never went away in America, but people became embarrassed to do it. Racism never went away, but people became embarrassed to do it. One thing that happened in the last year is that people got less embarrassed. The president almost legitimated it, but guess what? The embarrassment's coming back. And that's where I find some hope here. People, whether they are anti-Muslim or not, they're embarrassed to say if they are, and that's good.
Right. So that's a good news. In the United States today, in spite of all of this happening, so there is more understanding of Islam and Muslims. And okay, very good. I wanna come to you, Professor Besa. Professor Besa is from Kosovo. You in Kosovo, and I visited Kosovo a few times. And I met with the muftis here. We have to recognize the mufti of Kosovo is here. You have a beautiful interreligious collaboration. And you have also some experiences using them as a preventive measures. Tell us about your own experience as a Muslim communities living with the Christian communities and other faith communities, in your own experience in trying to basically to prevent any kind of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim sentiment.
Okay. Thank you. First, allow me to express my gratitude to the organizers, to all the facilitators, especially to the interpreters as well. And of course, my respect to Sheikh bin Baya for uplifting us spiritually and for retrieving actually globally that spirit of peace that was amongst us, but not much onto the surface. When it comes to Kosovo, and when I speak of Islamophobia in Kosovo, as it is a young country, just 10 years old, independence, we have this tendency of saying that, you know, even we are very specific and unique, and even our Islamophobia is very unique. When I say this, I have in mind two things. One is that Kosovo has a majority Muslim population who are native, non-immigrants. We live in Europe. We are surrounded by our neighbors, mainly Christians. We have been Muslims like for 700 years. It has been an organized religion. We have had our Mashiach, and that has inherited, maybe a bit switched the form, but it was there. So we are talking about organized congregations and communities. But nevertheless, it is weird, but it's a fact that the Islamophobia in Muslim majority countries that have emerged from the communist area is the most severe and the most aggressive. Having said that, I have also in mind countries of post-Soviet Union, like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and these countries where you again have Muslim majority population, but where the religious freedoms and rights are rather restricted, severely restricted. And that was no different with my country, unfortunately, even after the war, when this legacy of hostility towards what's religious and what religions are has been still surviving and somehow maintaining itself, mainly through Islamophobia. But I'm not going to talk about that negative thing. I'm going to talk about the positive thing and what made the religious communities get together. It's not only because of the pressure that came from the authorities and from the institutions who are hostile to religious communities so that the communities gathered with each other, but I'm also referring to a time period like a decade or more when we were under occupation and practically with no institutions, no governance and no political institutions, but it was the mosques and the churches amongst us who have organized the lives of the peoples and the population. And the interaction between these two pillars of our society was very, very powerful. So this is where practically everything has begun. Of course, Muslim majority people organized under the auspices of the Islamic community of Kosovo bear both the responsibility as a majority, but also the appreciation that they have outreach to any other minority group within our society in order to make them feel safe in the times of war and in the turmoils post-war in Kosovo. Of course, not because just I am a woman, but I have also to enlighten a history of interreligious interaction that has been running nonstop among women of different religious traditions. In Kosovo, we have what we call non-formal interfaith women network. And what these women did is really admiring. I can take you several examples just to illustrate the issues we have had in our society and how this network of these very heroic women actually dealt with. In 2004, there was a retaliation, kind of rebellious movement against the local Serbs. Because, as you might know, during the war, we have had 218 mosques that were burned and destroyed. So the retaliation that went from some extremist groups amongst us was to destroy the churches and to attack Serbs. And this is what made the Serbs who were anyhow living in some small enclave get even more isolated. So practically we had our pillar, that is the Orthodox Serb woman community, isolated. And that was a huge political matter, you know. So what we did is that we said, listen, we are going to break that wall. We are going to enter to the city where practically no one was entering, especially not the Albanians. Okay, I'm not going to take time with those details, but the year we did this, and Svetlana and these Orthodox women were crying of happiness just because somebody got to them, somebody, you know, from the other side. In that year, we were all regarded as traitors, as Islamists, and very anti-Albanian thing. But it took only a year when the political momentum in Kosovo changed, and then all our politicians were practically rushing to get into these Serbian enclaves, you know? Yeah. So, but nevertheless, what we benefited from that, and I think it's a good lesson for everyone here, is that we all know, I mean, we know, maybe you might not, but the Serbian Orthodox Church is very much influenced by the church in Belgrade. And very often, when our Honorable Mufti meets the Orthodox bishop, sometimes the meeting fails. It depends what's the political, let's say, mood. But our meetings never fail because these women, regardless what the politics is saying to them or even what their superiors are saying to them, they come to this meeting and we go on with these action. Another thing is that in Kosovo we have had and we still do have issues with education, especially of women who wear headscarf. It's interesting, it's a big complex situation, but more or less it's a perception that our country's secularism must be defended by keeping women with headscarves out of schools and out of public institutions. I think it did not have the effect of having all of us Muslims being active, lobbying, protesting, sending people to court, winning the cases, as much as it was effective a word of a Catholic bishop in a gathering in 2016. And of course, this did not happen by coincidence. It were the nuns, the members of our groups who have lobbied with their bishop and who stood up in this big gathering with a lot of media saying, the time when the authorities would tell us, ask us to hide our religion has ended. That era is gone. And tonight I am with Fatmire Buyupi. Otherwise, Fatmire Buyupi was a teacher of math with an headscarf that was being prohibited from her job. Another thing that it's a good example, I believe, is that we are all very much into this platform of countering violent extremism. And as I was saying, that we have a very unique version of Islamophobia, I think this platform has also some contextual, how to say, nuances which are different from the Western one and different from what the Muslims in the Western think about it, which I have understood that they are not very keen of in one way or another. But in these countries where you have little room to express who you are, and what your religion is, even the CVE platform would do the job. Let me just finish with this. I think it's very important that, again, it was the Orthodox community church that was painted with ISIS letters or something. But what happened is that immediately, not taking more than 20 minutes, all the senior officials of the Islamic community of Kosovo were on the scene, and this actually shut up the mouth of all the media and other Islamophobes to talk about how much ISIS there is in our society.
The solidarity, solidarity is always very important, and I'm glad that you highlighted the role of women in Kosovo when it comes to interfaith collaboration or addressing issues of anti-Muslim sentiment. But what about the youth? Yes. You know, His Excellency Muammar is here. We were together in prison, I think, the name of the city. That was 2 years ago. And then we have seen the youth. Kosovo today, more than 70%? 96%. 96%. Muslim, but the youth, what is the percent?
Yes, no, the youth is 70%, and the average age of our population is 26.
Yeah, 70% of the population in Kosovo, they are youth. Any efforts to engage them in these ongoing best practices that you are leading?
No. as I was trying to portray the situation in my country, when your country is part of a system like for 50 years, they have produced literature, and it has become a part of educational system, that content which is rather Islamophobic towards the majority. So this is the first thing that we are all very collectively organized to tackle and to deconstruct those texts where, for instance, Islam is described as having jihad as the main pillar of its faith, and all kinds of silly and nonsense things. But of course, this influences our youth, especially the ones who are, let's say, a bit careless to learn what their religion is or what the religions at all are. But of course, there is another side of the story in this, that the organization of youth, we call them tribunes, the youth gatherings, talking about these history books, talking about this link before the 50 years of communism, how Albanians lived, what was our lives, what were the position of the woman, which was even more favorable 100 years ago than it is now. And these are some of the things that we believe affects a lot into deconstructing their prejudices and bigotry against Islam. And not only this, it's very important to tell you that as a faculty of Islamic studies, our society is divided. We even have, not only the institution, civil society, we have the religious communities, as I was trying to explain, very separated, it's a society divided into three pieces. And the religious institutions, they have their educational institutions, and there is now an organized, month-to-month activity with students who study Islamic theology, with those who study Catholic theology and Orthodox theology, and those who are also trying to learn something about the presence of Hebrews in Kosovo.
Wonderful.
There are histories which we try to bring as an example, but moreover, we are very, dedicated to try to build up a counter-narrative, not only to what is extremist narrative in Islam, but a counter-narrative to the books that are into the schools, but portray Islams and Arabs and Turks and the whole Orient in a very negative frame.
Okay, so to reform this curriculum to the correct narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. So I want to go to Qari Asim, has been very patient here. But I want to also let you know that just get ready for your questions, because I want you also to contribute to this discussion. Qari Asim from the UK. Do you have shoulder to shoulder in the UK?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, please allow me to express my gratitude to Promoting for Peace Forum and also His Excellency Sheikh bin Bea for spreading this message of love and peace in our country. We have something called standing together, which is, I think, very much similar to shoulder to shoulder. Right. And it has two aspects. One is the religious leadership, standing together, symbolically, but also then actually having some social action projects. So to give you an example of religious leadership standing together, recently myself and the Archbishop of Canterbury did for the first time a live call-in radio interview where people were allowed to ask all sorts of questions, and it was quite nervous for both of us because for the first time, and it was to really debunk some of the myths that we have about faiths, but also about Islamophobia and other things. Another symbolic visit was myself and the senior rabbi of Reform Judaism to go to Calais, where the refugees from France trying to come over to England, and it was again to show solidarity to those refugees, but it was for the first time like a rabbi and an imam living in a tent, let's say, to show that standing together. Then very briefly, like social action projects, doing things together. So we have a project where the churches provide the kitchen, the chefs are Muslims, and it's the businesses that contribute in terms of ingredients. So it's bringing society together to feed the poor and vulnerable in the society. And that makes the faiths, religion relevant to people's lives. And as a result, it debunks the myths and also decreases the anti-Muslim hatred sentiments towards Muslims.
What is the menu in this kind of setting? What kind of cuisine you're cooking?
We do all sorts of Syrian, Turkish, Indian, Pakistani, so it's different, yeah. So it's like that. We do fish and chips. People like, yeah.
Yeah, good. But also you also work with the Jewish communities, Imam, as you know.
Yeah.
So tell us your experience and the best practices there.
Yeah, I think if we take the concept of hatred, and hatred isn't a sign of a healthy society. So the Jewish community has gone through, and still to a degree, there's anti-Semitism, and then we have Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, and it's working together, saying that a community, Jewish community, has already gone through, and now we are at the very early stages of Islamophobia, and we really don't want the repetition of that racism, bigotry, hatred, where another community is going to be targeted. So for instance, we've done visits as imams and rabbis to Auschwitz to feel the pain and the suffering that the Jewish community went through. Then also rabbis and imams have gone to Srebrenica and other places to see how the Muslim genocide took place. It's really putting yourself in others' shoes. And then we did a conference called Standing Together, where imams talked about anti-Semitism and Jewish colleagues talked about anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia. It's really putting ourselves into the shoes of others and saying, enough is enough. We shouldn't be, no community should be going through that kind of experience.
In comparison to Standing Together in the UK and Islamophobia in the United States, the shoulder to shoulder in the United States, I just want to compare that, because the founding conference of Shoulder to Shoulder you saw in the video, that is institutionalized. So the 35 denomination that Catherine is talking about, they're actually paying annual dues to have an operational organization. Is it Standing Together in the same structure in the UK?
Standing Together doesn't have the same structure, but our government has formed a working group, and I am part of that anti-Muslim hatred working group, bringing quasi-governmental agencies, all the government departments, they sit on that board, and also civil society members. And so it's a joint-up approach to tackle anti-Muslim hatred in society.
In collaboration with government.
In collaboration with government. And then also government has founded an agency which records anti-Muslim hatred incidents called Telmama. So there's a reporting mechanism. So if people feel frightened or afraid to go to the police to report the hate incident, then they can go and report to this agency. Right. And so it is not 100% institutionalized, but definitely there are steps towards institutionalizing it, and the government taking it seriously to tackle anti-Muslim hatred.
So Imam Qari mentioned the government a few times. This is not the case with you, Catherine. You don't get support like that from the U.S. government.
Correct. And of course, with politics changing, this is a challenge in certain ways. We worked quite closely with the government on certain initiatives in the past. So it's not institutionalized. Our cooperation with the government was not institutionalized, but we worked with the White House Office of Faith Initiatives on a nationwide Know Your Neighbor campaign. And actually, similar to the Tell Mama model, we have been working with some of our partners. I think the Arab American Institute is part of this as well, in a working group asking for the government to have a collaborative interagency platform for reporting and also finding resources to address hate crimes. And that's something that actually is still continuing under the current administration, that the some of the folks at the Department of Justice are still working on creating this important platform for people to be able to
And that's, you're talking about the interagency meeting at the Justice Department.
Right.
Yeah.
So a better platform for reporting hate crimes, because if a hate crime happens, it's very confusing currently where you go to report, where you get the right resources that you need, this sort of thing. So those are just a couple of examples, but of different ways that we liaise with the government on this. But much of our work really is on the community level and between our national organizations, working to help equip the faith leaders on both of these levels to be able to effectively address anti-Muslim bigotry in their own communities. And we really see, I think, fruits of this collaboration in many ways. I can go into that a bit later.
Right. Yeah, no, the interagency, just for the audience to, it's very important forum that bring together leaders of the Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Sikh Americans, Hindu Americans, and other groups in one platform hosted by the Justice Department, chaired by the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and they bring the issues of the communities. And then you have the agencies, you have the US government, different agencies, and they would report back the issues. If there has to do with the Department of Homeland Security or FBI or State Department, they report back. I want to go to you, Jim, and then I want to go to the audience.
Just, let me say that I was there at the beginning of this interagency group, started in the 90s.
Okay.
It then went dormant for a while. After 9/11, it started again with Ralph Boyd and has continued since then. And one of the things that maybe folks would find interesting, and I found certainly quite inspiring, was when we met with the first interagency meeting in the Obama administration. There were about 30 of us, representative of the different organizations that were there, with about 30 people from all of the different agencies, from the Justice Department, from the Department of Homeland Security, Education, et cetera. And I dare say that about a third of those representatives of the government agencies were either Arab American or American Muslim. And that to me is the kind of progress that we've made that is so critical to beating back this problem. When I first started in this work, we didn't have anybody from our community in government in those positions, and they're there now, and they're not going away. Even though they may not agree with what's going on in the politics of Washington, they're keeping their positions, and they're doing great work. And in particular, I want to point out the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, which has been absolutely dogged at fighting back every time we report an issue to them. They go and prosecute. This is different. It's important. FBI has done a great job. I really think it's important to note the kind of work that is going on. Despite some of the difficulties, we have some real strong agency support in government that is helping to combat these hate crimes when they occur.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very good explanation. I want to go to the audience. I have a request from Sheikh Al-Qadri from Ireland. It's good to get the experience from Ireland. If you want to have a question or just keep it brief, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Very quickly, I would like to thank the organizers, the United Arab Emirates government, and of course Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, not only for organizing this event, but most importantly, for bringing people from around the world together that are working all in their own capacities or leading organizations with the same mission. I just want to highlight everyone's attention to a particular thing. In the European Union, there is an agency based in Austria called the Fundamental Human Rights Agency. They have conducted a research last year. The research was published in September this year. The research was on the experiences of Islamophobia in Europe, where they interviewed more than 10,000 Muslims throughout Europe, in 12 European major countries. Some of the countries scored very high, for example, the United Kingdom. Contrary to that, Holland, that has a very large Turkish-Moroccan community, scored very low in terms of experiences. There was a high rate, 72% of Muslims that they interviewed throughout Europe have experiences of racism and discrimination, and only 12% had reported it. So they came together to kind of see what they can do on the European Union level to confront this and to combat this. So it is important that all of us that are based in Europe or in America, that we share our experiences with the agency, Fundamental Human Rights Agency and the European Commission. They really want to do something about that. They have acknowledged this major challenge and problem. They know that these Muslims are Muslims based in Europe, are European Muslims. They know that they are part of the community. They want to give this sense of belonging to the community, but we really, as a community, need to be engaged with our governments and these agencies. And I think as Muslims, or in Europe, or in America, we kind of really lack that collaboration and the relationship with those agencies.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Imam Qadri. I have another request from Nusrat Ramadan.
أخوكم نصرة رمضان من جمهورية مقدونيا، رئيس الجلسة المحترم، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، العلماء الأفاضل، الإخوة والأخوات، أيها الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي في بداية هذا اللقاء الميمون أن أهنئ راعي المنتدى على هذا الإنجاز الحضاري القيم لما له من آثار طيبة، وأكرر شكري لسمو الشيخ عبد الله بن زايد آل نهيان وزير الخارجية لدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة الذي يرعى هذا المنتدى وهذا الملتقى الطيب المبارك. لا شك أن رسالة الإسلام هي الرسالة التي جاءت لإنقاذ البشرية. وجود الإسلام في هذا الأرض إلا وانتشرت الرحمة والسلام والأمان والتعايش. ظاهرة الخوف من الإسلام أو إسلاموفوبيا أصبحت تشكل قلقاً وانشغالاً لدى جميع شعوب أمتنا الإسلامية، بعدما بدأت تتسع حالات التعصب والتمييز ضد المسلمين وانتشار الأعمال المسيئة لمبادئ الدين الإسلامي. وما هو الحل لظاهرة الإسلاموفوبيا حول العالم؟ وأن كل الإرهاب الذي يتنامى في كل مكان لا علاقة له من قريب أو بعيد بالتعاليم ديننا الحنيف أو التراث الديني. مثال لهذا النوع من إسلاموفوبيا في بلد من بلدان أوروبا، قامت امرأة بالهجوم على فتاة مسلمة محجبة داخل حافلة، وصاحت المرأة في وجه الفتاة وتسحب الحجاب من رأسها قائلة: أنتم إرهابيون ويموت الناس بسببكم، لا يمكن أن تعيشوا في هذا البلد، أنت لا يمكن أن تدرسي محجبة، يجب أن تموت. هذا المثال ليست فردية، بل هي نتيجة مرض نفسي وفكري يعاني منه عدد من الناس في دول مختلفة. هناك جهلاً صارخاً بحقيقة الإسلام، وبخاصة في العالم الغربي الذي يستقي معلوماته عن الإسلام من مصادر قد تفتقر في كثير من الحالات إلى الموضوعية والنزاهة والتجرد أو الإحاطة الكافية بحقيقة الإسلام وجوهره.
شكراً جزيلاً على هذه المداخلة. شكراً على هذه المداخلة. نحن حقيقة نريد نبقى في الموضوع. نحن نعلم we know that a number of these Islamophobia incidents But we really, this particular session, we want to focus our efforts in presenting best practices. So I want to really request all of you to talk about, if you have specific questions to the panel, please do that. And, or if you have a contribution that to highlight best practice to address issues of anti-Muslim sentiments, please also highlight that. So that's going to be my request to you all. We accept all the appreciation and thank you. This is all great, but we have just a little time to engage everyone. Do you have, I see hand there in the back. Yeah, please. Okay, sure.
Much luck.
Yeah, can you get...
So thank you to the panel. Really appreciate your thoughts. A question that I have is that, I mean, a common theme that we've been discussing in this conference as a whole is this idea of Muslims integrating into society and, I guess, you know, expressing agency to kind of counter Islamophobia, to produce a counter narrative. But given that Islamophobia is so politicized now across Europe, North America, you know, pretty much every country you can think of, you know, even in Canada now, increasingly in the political discourse, you have a lot of Islamophobic rhetoric that's coming across now. Wouldn't you say that, or I mean, a thought that I would have is that Muslim leadership increasingly needs to, I guess, encourage politicians and within the political discourse in the West to exercise more restraint, number one. And also Islamic leadership needs to encourage Muslims in the West to be involved in the political process. So I just want to know your thoughts about that.
Okay, this is working. Ambassador Seberstein, you have not answering the question, but you said you have a comments, yeah.
I just, about a year ago, Sheikh bin Baya came to the United States and gave a lecture at the Finnish embassy, remember? Here, and he lifted up some of those aspects of how the United States went about addressing Islamophobia in the context of the question posed to him about what happens after the Marrakesh Declaration. What do we do about it? And he basically was saying, we're not going to be able to do everything through here. All we can do is empower people through these periodic conferences that we have to go home and to do this work themselves. And in identifying what in the United States worked well that he lifted up, he mentioned the following things. First, how vigorous, and Jim Zogby mentioned this, how vigorous the enforcement of anti-discrimination laws are that protects Muslims in the United States. Not just in general, but in employment discrimination, in housing discrimination, in the right to build mosques where they want under the Religious Land Use Protection Act. And part of that act, it's a Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, the ability of people who are in prison to live out with their religious lives as well. And the Justice Department and local governments act vigorously in terms of prosecuting cases where there are attacks on the Muslim community, but in defending the rights of Muslims to wear head coverings in employment cases, to wear beards if they're in prison. These are cases that went up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And secondly, he pointed out how vigorous the religious communities are. And we're hearing many different forms of that in responding, not when they are attacked, their own group is attacked, but standing up for each other to delegitimize hate speech, delegitimize acts of hatred. And third, the extraordinary role that civil society plays as well here, that what the religious community does, it works hand in hand with the civil liberties groups and the civil rights groups here, all standing together, and the leadership of those groups standing out to condemn any kind of expression of Islamophobia. So even if at any point the President of the United States takes positions that are out of sync with that, but governors of states and mayors of cities and local officials and civil liberties and civil rights leaders, they all stand up and fill some of the void that is left. Jim mentioned before, you know, the impact of the president. I would add to that the corrosive impact as well of the internet, of social media, and when the anonymity of social media has allowed hate speech to proliferate across the world in ways that never would have been done if people had to put their name to it and be identified as expressing that. So those are challenges dealing with social media also that we are working on, the groups here are working on, to try and work with the media companies, social media companies, to get them to be more responsible, to try and control some of the anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, anti-LGBT, anti-black language and expressions that appear there as well. And you need all of these woven together if you're going to be effective.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll go to the audience and come right back to you. Sheikh Iskander, can you get the mic to the Sheikh, please? Just please summarize in question or comment in best practice in 1 minute.
Iskander Bruce, the chairman of Muslim community in Albania. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Firstly, I want to say that I feel very great in this conference and thank the leadership of Abdullah bin Bey and to the generosity of this great country. My understanding during this conference is related that the Muslim societies, in order to reduce the prejudice and to fight this Islamophobia, have to establish dialogue bridges between non-Muslim societies based on shared values, universal human values. But my point is, without being misunderstood, to my experience, I feel that many times Arab Muslims society have difficulties to understand or to make dialogue with non-Arab Muslims. So sometimes it is not a point of religion. Sometimes the culture difference. So my suggestion is to invest more in cultural diplomacy between Muslim societies and non-Muslim societies, because culture is very important to decrease the barriers between different societies. Thank you very much.
I think it's very, very important to touch upon one issue which I think is common for the whole world now, and that is the youth and their sense of identity. Because I think this is where actually some major problems arise. and the issue of the family values and the strong families, something that unites, I believe, religions and communities across. In this regard, it is very important for our youth. Again, I go back to the educational system and the generation, the critical thinking that they produce, which I believe it is still lacking for some part of the world, including my country. But you know, there is another issue with this Islamophobia in Eastern European countries, that it consumes itself. You know what I mean? You can lie people like for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 60 years, but you know, there will be a point when the youth, especially the youth, will no longer buy it. And they will ask for questions, and they will come up to answers. And so this is where actually the leadership of the Muslim community comes in place with their work and with their organization. Kosovo, for instance, has a very large diaspora, both in US and in Western Europe. And to share the information, the first mosque in the US was built by Albanians in 1904, if you haven't known this. And it is again the mosques that are the ones to be caring about the youth and the sense of their, and nurturing the sense of their belongingness. Another thing that I would like also to share, that as a good example, I know you are looking about good examples. I mean, it could be beautiful to see a non-Muslim standing for a Muslim, but it is as much ugly to meet an Islamophobic Muslim who is against a fellow Muslim in a classroom or a teacher. So the good practices was that most of our girls who were excellent students and they were really proving their qualities beyond their religion, is that the students boycotted lessons. They didn't want to go to the school that day unless their friend is back to the school. And I think this is another kind of message that the youth should be equipped with. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Catherine, I'm really, we need to wrap up shortly. And before that, we have a presentation by Dr. Jim Zoghbi as well. But I know Sheikh Hamza here requested also intervention. Can you get the mic to Sheikh Hamza, please? Please, here in the front. Sheikh Hamza is in the front here.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask Dr. Zoghbi what he thinks in the current administration. I mean, we saw Gorka's gone and Bannon was gone, but there's still a lot, I think, of anti-Muslim sentiment that has come out of some of the people within the administration and some of the tweets that have come out. What do you think is the best approach for the Muslim community? Because we have some Muslims that have become very belligerent vis-a-vis the administration and are quite vocal about that, which sometimes has a backlash against the community. What do you think are the best practices for the Muslim community in addressing the current climate right now?
Is this on? Yeah. My country is a weird country and a great country at the same time. Becoming American is almost like an alchemy. I mean, it takes people from all over everywhere and it transforms them in a generation into a new creation, being American. And not only do we become transformed, but America itself becomes transformed. When the bigots and the xenophobes talk about American culture and American this and American that, I say, what are they talking about? What is American food if not food from all over the world? What is American culture? What is American music if not culture and music from all over the world? So my best sense is that while we're doing all the things we're doing, there is this inevitable process in America that works itself out so that what was shunned in one generation becomes American and a centerpiece of the American culture in the next generation. And I see that happening. I see that happening with the Muslim community. I mean, who would have thought I mean, when I came to Washington 40 years ago, I remember helping the Reagan administration write the first Eid message. They didn't even know what it was. We had to go and ask them if they would do it. And now, as I like to say, you get iftared to death in Washington during Ramadan. I mean, there's like a dinner or two every single night by some agency in town. I mean, Muslims have become, whether you have the bigots wanting to hold them back or not, they've become a fundamental part of the mainstream. And this is an inevitable process. So my advice is keep doing what you're doing, because that's the way it ultimately works out. But I understand your point about the harshness and those who react that way, I think, sort of set back the process. It is better for people to know us as we are, as the good, productive, creative people that we are, than the angry people that only end up fitting the stereotype and maybe setting us back just a bit. But I'm seeing this work out in a very positive way, and I think we just keep doing what we're doing because we're making real progress. And I want to just say, I mean, Mohammed, the work you've done, people gave Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya credit and the organizers of the conference, but the work that you've done and the work that ISNA has done and groups like that have made a huge difference in transforming the political climate. I would say that if you had not organized, if the Muslim American community had not organized as effectively and as smartly as it had, we wouldn't be in the position we're in today. So
yeah,
I really think
it's a joint effort, Jim. Thank you. It's a joint effort. Catherine, you want to add to that?
Just very briefly wanted to add, and I think that's true, these deeper networks at the local level are really what causes us to be able to have these quick responses when there's a hate crime, or there was a mosque vandalized, for instance, in Louisville, Kentucky, which is my home state, and within minutes, people were on the phone with one another, and they got hundreds and hundreds of people out there on a Friday to actually physically repaint the mosque together. It blocked the highway, and that's really because of these deeper local relationships. But I just wanted to add that one of the things we've really seen working, I think, in the last bit is that Americans are committed to this idea of fairness. And when Muslims and non-Muslims are standing together and making arguments about fairness of treatment, we've seen that going a long way. And so I just wanted to add that this is such a strong value within American society that, that we've seen when people see the bigotry for what it is, they react and say that that's unfair and we don't want to be that way. It's when it's sort of hiding behind certain policies that are polished up to look like they're not Islamophobic, but they actually are. That's where I think people get carried along with those policies. But when people see the hate for what it is, they react accordingly, and they don't want to be that. So I just wanted to share that in addition to what Dr. Zaghi shared.
Thank you, Catherine. Ambassador Saperstein, closing.
Just a comment about the international scene. We've been talking about the United States. I served for President Obama as the United States ambassador with global responsibilities for religious freedom. As many of you know, we produce an annual report assessing religious tolerance and religious freedom in every country across the globe. So in every country where there is discrimination against Muslim communities by law or social hostility towards the Muslim communities, we have lifted it up in the report, and you should all take a look at countries you're interested in. Working with the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, we developed out of the UN Resolution 1618 all kinds of strategies and tactics to use non-criminalized way to deal with religious intolerance or hate speech against religious groups. And at some point, the forum may want to take a look at what's come out of those follow-up conferences as a blueprint for ways that some of these issues can be addressed. And yes, let me conclude just saying honestly, we also talk about in Muslim-majority countries how Muslim minorities are treated and how non-Muslims are treated. And there, too, there are challenges. The one fundamental rule I think all of us would agree on is these rights, this sense of tolerance is indivisible. If any group can be discriminated against, then all groups are vulnerable. If we're going to end Islamophobia, end anti-Semitism, and anti-any religion, it is going to happen because we make it a universal norm that all religions, even some who are unpopular in our countries, that all religions that exercise their rights peacefully are going to be protected.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Saprastine. Qari Asim, your closing statement.
I think intolerance has generally increased over the years and across the world. And it's challenging intolerances in our own tribes and challenging all sorts of hatred and perhaps bigotry towards the other within our own circles is perhaps one of the best practices to deal with intolerance in society. And I think there's a lot of good work happening at local level, like for instance in our country, under the Christian Muslim Forum, lots of twinning of mosques and churches is taking place, and then also at national level, like Caravan of Peace is a great example of people coming together under one banner for a particular mission, and I think that a replication of those kind of good practices will serve us fantastically to deal with hatred and anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred.
Thank you so much, Qari Asim. Catherine, 30 seconds.
Sure. I'll just say that, I mean, we all have mentioned that the U.S. has a very challenging political climate for this issue right now, but I think that silver lining that we've seen, that I think Dr. Zogby is pointing to actually in the data that he'll be sharing, is that people have come out in force against some of the anti-Muslim policies and anti-Muslim discrimination. Shoulder to shoulder, for instance, we have not had trouble finding people who are looking for something to do. It's more that we are always challenged to figure out exactly where to direct the energy, because there are so many people across the U.S., I think many, many more than the people who are promoting this hatred, that are wanting to figure out the best ways to support the Muslim community. And they don't want to just support just like, going to press conferences. They really want to get their hands dirty, trying to figure out how to really do the best work together. So I think that's important message to take away, that these localized efforts are critical, and that we see so much of this happening.
Right, great. Besa, 30-second closing statement.
30 seconds, okay.
Yep.
I think that there is another thing that does a good job when it comes to interreligious dialogue and combating Islamophobia, and that is also related to patriarchy and some stereotypes in the society. So you need to work in improving the images on two levels. At least this is relevant for my society. One is the empowered Muslim woman who speaks her heart and her mind, and who is powerful enough to break up the stereotypes, all the negative stereotypes of ignorant, backward Muslim women, etc., etc. And also an image, and I go back to what the Mufti of Albania was saying about the cultural exchange. I think in the part of the world where we come from, the image of Arabs and Turks could help us themselves as Muslims do better in the sense of cultural exchange and improving the image, which is rather negative, unfortunately. And did I miss something else? So much. Okay, thank you. Thank you. It was an honor.
Dr. Zogby, you're going to do the poll? Okay. Please join me to thank our panel here. Thank you so much. It's a great discussion. We can talk, whole evening on this issue, but thank you so much for sharing experiences, and thank you all for sharing as well. Thank you. I want to make an announcement. We are going to have the dinner at 7 o'clock. So please be sure to be in this room at 7 o'clock. So 7 o'clock, we'll begin the dinner. There is an announcement for Al-Hassan bin Ali Awards. So thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. نرجو من الإخوة والأخوات الكرماء الخروج من القاعة، لأنه نحاول نعد هذه القاعة لحفل العشاء.